There exists a silent warfare being waged in every room you enter, every conversation you hold, every glance exchanged between strangers. It is not fought with weapons of steel or words of rage, but with something far more insidious, the subtle manipulation of perception itself. In the courts of power throughout history, there have always been two types of individuals. Those who command the room with their mere presence, and those who fade into the wallpaper of insignificance, desperately hoping to be noticed, yet perpetually overlooked. The difference between these two fates is not found in wealth, beauty, or even intelligence, but in something darker, something that most people refuse to acknowledge because it forces them to confront an uncomfortable truth about human nature. This is the psychology that Niccolo Machiavelli understood with chilling clarity when he observed the mechanics of power in Renaissance Florence, watching princes rise and fall, not by virtue of their goodness, but by their mastery of perception and fear. You have felt this reality, whether you admit it or not. You have witnessed someone enter a space and immediately shift the energy, commanding attention without uttering a single word, while others speak endlessly, yet their voices evaporate into meaningless noise. You have seen people who inspire a peculiar mixture of respect and caution, individuals whose opinions carry weight, not because they are necessarily correct, but because there is an unspoken understanding that crossing them would be unwise. Meanwhile, there are those, perhaps you have even been one of them, who contribute thoughtfully, act kindly, work diligently, yet remain perpetually invisible. Their contributions forgotten moments after they leave the room. The cruel question that haunts the minds of the overlooked is this: what separates those who are feared from those who are ignored? Is it mere chance, an accident of circumstance, or is there a hidden architecture to social dominance that operates beneath the surface of polite society? Machiavelli recognized that human beings do not respond to reality as it is, but to reality as it appears to be. The prince who rules effectively is not necessarily the most virtuous, but the one who understands how to cultivate an image that ensures others think carefully before challenging him. This is not about cruelty for its own sake, nor is it about becoming a tyrant who rules through terror alone. Such figures burn brightly but briefly, collapsing under the weight of their own excess. Rather, it is about understanding the dark mathematics of human behavior, the calculus of respect that operates according to principles most people would prefer to believe do not exist. In a world where kindness is often mistaken for weakness and assertiveness for aggression, those who comprehend these psychological undercurrents possess an advantage so profound it borders on the supernatural. The uncomfortable truth is that being feared, in the Machiavellian sense, is not about inspiring hatred or revulsion. It is about creating a boundary of respect that others dare not cross, about establishing yourself as someone whose time, attention, and goodwill are valuable precisely because they are not freely given to everyone. Those who are perpetually ignored have made themselves too available, too predictable, too safe. They have signaled to the world that their presence carries no consequence, that their approval or disapproval changes nothing, that they can be taken for granted without risk. In the economy of attention and respect, they have devalued their own currency to the point of worthlessness. Meanwhile, those who understand the dark psychology of social dominance have learned to create scarcity around themselves, to make their attention a prize rather than a given, to ensure that others understand there are consequences, not necessarily dramatic or violent, but real nonetheless, to disrespecting them. What you are about to discover is not a comfortable philosophy, nor is it one that will align with the sanitized narratives of equality and universal niceness that permeate modern discourse. Machiavelli wrote, "For those willing to see the world as it truly operates, not as we wish it would operate." He understood that the person who refuses to acknowledge the darker aspects of human nature will inevitably become their victim, while those who comprehend these forces, even if they choose to use them sparingly or ethically, gain a form of agency that others can never access. The strategies you will learn are not about becoming cruel or manipulative in the shallow sense, but about understanding the psychological architecture that determines who holds power in any social dynamic and who remains perpetually subordinate. This knowledge has shaped kingdoms, toppled empires, and continues to operate in every boardroom, every social gathering, every relationship where one person somehow always gets their way while another always yields. The question is not whether you will exist within this system. You already do. The question is whether you will remain ignorant of its rules or finally learn to play the game that everyone else is already playing, whether they admit it or not. The foundation of all social dominance lies in a principle that Machiavelli articulated with brutal clarity. It is better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. This statement, perhaps more than any other in his corpus, has been misunderstood and misapplied by those who mistake fear for simple intimidation or aggression. The fear Machiavelli speaks of is not the trembling terror of a hostage before a captor, but rather the careful consideration that enters someone's mind before they decide to disrespect, dismiss, or cross you. It is the subtle awareness that consequences exist, that your boundaries are real, that your time and attention are not infinite resources to be exploited without reciprocity. Those who are perpetually ignored have failed to establish this fundamental boundary, operating instead under the naive assumption that being endlessly available, agreeable, and accommodating will somehow earn them respect. In reality, such behavior accomplishes precisely the opposite, training others to view them as a resource to be consumed rather than a person to be respected. Consider how power truly operates in human societies, stripped of all the comforting myths we tell ourselves about meritocracy and fairness. A person enters your awareness not because they are necessarily the most talented or the most virtuous, but because their presence carries weight, because ignoring them would create some form of discomfort or consequence. This might manifest as professional repercussions, social awkwardness, or simply the loss of an opportunity. But the mechanism remains consistent. Attention flows toward those who have made their attention scarce and valuable, not toward those who have made themselves perpetually available. The individual who responds to every message immediately, who agrees with every opinion expressed by others, who never causes friction or discomfort, has effectively removed themselves from the equation of consideration. They have become part of the background, pleasant perhaps, but ultimately forgettable, because they have demonstrated that engaging with them costs nothing and yields nothing distinctive. Machiavelli observed that the successful prince must sometimes engage in actions that appear harsh or even cruel, not from sadism, but from necessity. He must occasionally make examples of those who violate his authority, not because punishment is inherently enjoyable, but because the absence of consequences invites chaos and disrespect. This principle scales down from kingdoms to individual relationships with perfect precision. The person who never enforces their boundaries, who allows others to cancel plans repeatedly, who tolerates disrespect without consequence, who gives endlessly without receiving, has effectively announced to the world that they can be treated poorly without risk. Human nature, in its unvarnished reality, responds to incentives and consequences. When disrespecting someone carries no cost, most people will eventually disrespect them, not necessarily out of malice, but simply because humans conserve their courtesy and consideration for situations where it serves a purpose. The dark psychology at work here involves understanding that people assign value based not on abstract principles of fairness, but on their perception of cost and scarcity. A person whose time is always available becomes worthless by definition, Regardless of how talented or intelligent they might be, a person whose approval is guaranteed becomes meaningless, because approval that cannot be lost has no value. Conversely, the individual whose time must be earned, whose approval must be won, whose boundaries are clearly demarcated and defended, automatically becomes more significant in the minds of others. This is not because humans are inherently shallow or cruel, but because we are wired to assign importance to things that are scarce and to ignore things that are abundant. The person who makes themselves scarce, not through manipulative games, but through genuine self-respect and standards, becomes automatically more interesting, more valuable, more worthy of consideration than the person who has made themselves infinitely available. Machiavelli understood that maintaining power requires a delicate balance. The prince who is only feared will eventually face rebellion, as subjects with nothing to lose become dangerous. Yet the prince who is only loved will be taken advantage of, his kindness interpreted as weakness, his generosity as obligation rather than gift. The optimal position lies in being respected, which requires the capacity to inspire both positive and negative consequences. People must understand that treating you well yields benefits, access to your time, your insights, your support, while treating you poorly yields withdrawal of these benefits and potentially more direct consequences. This is not about being vindictive or petty, but about operating according to a clear system of reciprocity that others can understand and predict. When your behavior is consistent and your boundaries are clear, people learn quickly how to interact with you successfully, and those unwilling to meet those standards naturally filter themselves out of your life. The psychological mechanism that determines whether you are ignored or feared is fundamentally about the expectations you establish and maintain. Every interaction teaches others how to treat you. When someone disrespects you and you accept it without consequence, you have taught them that disrespecting you is permissible. When someone takes advantage of your generosity and you continue giving regardless, you have taught them that exploitation is acceptable. When someone cancels plans with you repeatedly and you simply reschedule without expressing any disappointment or withdrawing availability, you have taught them that your time has no value. These lessons accumulate over hundreds of interactions, creating a reputation and expectation that becomes incredibly difficult to change once established. This is why the person who starts as a doormat rarely earns respect later. They have already trained everyone around them in how to treat them, and changing that dynamic requires completely disrupting established patterns, which most people lack the courage or knowledge to do. Machiavelli's prince understood that reputation is everything, that perception shapes reality more powerfully than reality itself shapes perception. If you are perceived as someone who can be dismissed without consequence, you will be dismissed, regardless of your actual capabilities or worth. If you are perceived as someone whose boundaries are real and whose displeasure carries weight, you will be treated with consideration, regardless of whether you ever actually need to deploy any consequences. The dark truth is that most of the power lies in the perception of consequences rather than in actual enforcement. The person who is truly respected rarely needs to punish anyone, because their reputation precedes them and people naturally regulate their behavior to avoid crossing clearly established lines. Meanwhile, the person who is perpetually taken advantage of often tries to suddenly enforce boundaries after years of not having any, and discovers that no one takes their sudden assertions seriously because they have no credibility in that domain. The mechanics of fear, in the Machiavellian sense, operate through a principle of calculated unpredictability, tempered by fundamental reliability. This seems paradoxical at first, but understanding this tension is crucial to grasping how dominance actually functions in human hierarchies. Those who are feared are not wildly erratic or randomly cruel. Such people are simply avoided and isolated, not respected. Rather, they are fundamentally reliable in certain core ways, while maintaining an element of unpredictability in how they respond to boundary violations. People know that this person will honor agreements, will treat them well when treated well, will be consistent in their professional or personal conduct. However, they also understand that crossing this person, taking advantage of their kindness, or disrespecting their time will result in consequences that might range from subtle withdrawal to more overt confrontation, and the specific response cannot be predicted with certainty. This calculated unpredictability serves a specific psychological function. It keeps others in a state of mild alertness regarding your boundaries without creating the exhausting hypervigilance that comes from dealing with someone genuinely unstable. Machiavelli advised the prince to be both feared and unpredictable in his responses to betrayal, because predictability in consequence allows people to calculate the cost-benefit ratio of exploiting you. If someone knows that you will always respond to disrespect with nothing more than a disappointed look, they can factor that minimal cost into their decision-making and proceed with disrespecting you whenever convenient. If they know you will always respond with explosive anger, they can simply avoid you entirely. But if they understand that you might respond with quiet withdrawal, with public calling out, with complete severance of the relationship, or with measured confrontation, and they cannot predict which, they become much more careful about crossing those lines in the first place. The person who is perpetually ignored has typically made themselves entirely predictable in a way that removes all tension from interactions with them. Others know exactly how they will respond to any situation, with accommodation, with understanding, with flexibility, with forgiveness. This complete predictability, while perhaps admirable from a moral standpoint, is tactically disastrous from a power standpoint. Humans are fundamentally game-theoretic creatures, constantly calculating optimal strategies for achieving their goals with minimal cost. When you make yourself entirely predictable in your willingness to absorb poor treatment, you remove any strategic reason for others to treat you well. They know they can take advantage of your kindness, cancel plans, prioritize others, make demands, and you will simply accept it because you always do. The calculus is simple. If treating you poorly costs nothing and treating you well requires effort, why would most people choose the more costly option? Machiavelli recognized that the successful exercise of power requires maintaining what might be called strategic ambiguity about your capacity and willingness to impose consequences. This does not mean making threats or engaging in bluster, which are typically signs of weakness rather than strength. Rather, it means demonstrating through occasional action that your boundaries are real, that consequences exist, and that you possess both the awareness to recognize boundary violations and the backbone to respond to them. The person who has established this reputation rarely needs to actually deploy consequences because their reputation precedes them. Others self-regulate their behavior in interactions with this person, treating them with more consideration than they might treat someone else, not out of fear of violence or aggression, but out of recognition that this particular individual will not simply absorb poor treatment silently. The dark psychology here involves understanding that respect is not freely given, but must be strategically cultivated through a consistent pattern of enforcing boundaries and maintaining standards. This process begins with the smallest interactions and scales up to the largest. When someone makes a thoughtless comment and you let it pass without acknowledgement, you have established that thoughtless comments are acceptable. When someone interrupts you and you simply fall silent, you have established that interrupting you carries no cost. When someone asks for a favor and you grant it without any consideration of reciprocity or appropriateness, you have established that your resources are available on demand. These micro-interactions accumulate into a macro pattern that becomes your reputation, and your reputation determines whether others think carefully before their interactions with you, or whether they simply treat you as a convenient resource. Machiavelli observed that the prince must occasionally act with harshness, not because he enjoys it, but because the alternative, being taken advantage of, leads to chaos and eventual downfall. This principle applies with equal force to individual social dynamics. The person who never says no, who never expresses disappointment, who never withdraws their presence as a consequence of poor treatment, will inevitably be exploited. This is not a moral judgment about human nature, but simply a recognition of how incentive structures work. When one option costs nothing and provides benefits, while the alternative requires effort, most people will choose the path of least resistance. The individual who has failed to create any cost associated with poor treatment has effectively removed themselves from the category of people who must be treated with consideration. The transformation from ignored to feared requires fundamentally restructuring these incentive frameworks, and this process is both uncomfortable and necessary. It means saying no to requests that do not serve you. It means expressing disappointment when others fail to meet reasonable standards. It means withdrawing your presence from people who consistently disrespect your time or boundaries. It means occasionally allowing relationships to end rather than contorting yourself to maintain connections with people who demonstrate through their actions that they do not value you. These actions feel harsh when you are unaccustomed to enforcing boundaries, and others may initially respond with surprise or even anger when you stop accepting treatment that you previously tolerated. But this discomfort is the price of transition from doormat to individual worthy of respect, and those unwilling to pay this price will remain perpetually in the category of the ignored. The architecture of fear, properly understood, is built not on dramatic gestures, but on consistency of consequence. Machiavelli observed that the most effective princes were not those who engaged in theatrical displays of power, but those who quietly and consistently enforced their will, creating an environment where people understood the rules and operated within them, not out of terror, but out of rational self-interest. This same principle governs individual social dynamics with remarkable precision. The person who gains genuine respect, the kind of respect that looks like fear when observed from outside, is not the one who occasionally explodes in anger or makes dramatic pronouncements, but the one who consistently, quietly, and without excessive emotion enforces their boundaries and withdraws their presence from situations and people that violate their standards. This consistency serves a crucial psychological function. It creates predictability around consequences, even while maintaining unpredictability around which specific consequences might apply. People learn that crossing your boundaries will result in some form of consequence, even if they cannot predict exactly what form that consequence will take. This is fundamentally different from the inconsistent person who sometimes enforces boundaries and sometimes does not, creating confusion about where lines actually exist. When you are inconsistent, people learn that your boundaries are negotiable, that if they push hard enough or catch you in the right mood, you will cave to their demands. When you are consistent, people learn that your boundaries are real, that consequences always follow violations, and that the rational choice is simply to respect those boundaries rather than to test them. The ignored individual typically suffers from a fundamental inconsistency in their approach to boundaries. They have none, or they have them, but fail to enforce them, or they enforce them erratically based on emotion rather than principle. This inconsistency trains others to view their expressed preferences as suggestions rather than requirements, their stated limits as starting points for negotiation rather than actual boundaries. Over time, people learn that this individual's no means maybe, and their maybe means yes if you push a little, and their discomfort can be safely ignored because it leads to nothing. The psychological pattern established is one where the ignored person's internal experience of violation matters less than the external absence of consequences, teaching everyone involved that this person's feelings and preferences are ultimately irrelevant to decision-making. Machiavelli understood that power vacuum creates chaos, and nowhere is this more evident than in social dynamics where one party refuses to claim authority over their own boundaries. When you fail to enforce standards for how others treat you, you do not create a harmonious environment of mutual respect. You create a vacuum that others will fill according to their own convenience. Some will treat you well out of genuine goodness, but many will treat you according to what costs them the least effort. And over time, even those with good intentions will unconsciously downgrade their treatment of you because humans naturally conserve their social effort for relationships where it yields returns. The person who gives endlessly while receiving little eventually trains even their well-intentioned friends to take advantage of them, not through malice, but through the simple psychological reality that humans adapt to whatever patterns exist. The feared individual, in contrast, has eliminated this vacuum by consistently claiming authority over their own boundaries and consistently imposing consequences when those boundaries are violated. This does not require drama or aggression. Often, the most effective consequence is simply the quiet withdrawal of your presence, time, and energy from people who demonstrate they do not value these resources. When someone cancels plans with you repeatedly and you stop initiating plans with them, you have imposed a consequence. When someone speaks to you disrespectfully and you end the conversation politely but firmly, you have imposed a consequence. When someone makes demands of your time without reciprocity and you stop being available to them, you have imposed a consequence. These quiet, measured responses are far more effective than angry outbursts because they cannot be dismissed as emotional overreactions. They are simply the natural result of someone rationally allocating their limited resources toward relationships that provide value. Machiavelli advised that consequences should be proportional and purposeful, not excessive or vindictive. The prince who punishes minor infractions with execution creates not respect but rebellion, while the prince who allows major betrayals to go unpunished invites more betrayal. This calibration applies equally to personal boundaries. The consequence should match the violation. A minor disrespect might warrant a raised eyebrow or a gentle correction. A pattern of disrespect might warrant a direct conversation expressing your standards. A persistent pattern of disrespect, despite clear communication, might warrant withdrawal from the relationship entirely. This proportionality serves both practical and psychological purposes. It prevents you from appearing unstable while ensuring that your responses are memorable and meaningful enough to actually modify behavior. The transition from being ignored to being feared requires accepting a truth that many find uncomfortable. You cannot control how others treat you, but you can control your responses to their treatment, and through those responses, you can train people either toward respecting your boundaries or toward losing access to you. This framework removes the victimhood narrative while acknowledging the reality that you do have agency in these situations. You cannot force someone to respect you, but you can make disrespecting you costly enough that rational people choose not to do it. You cannot force someone to value your time, but you can withdraw that time from people who demonstrate they do not value it. You cannot force someone to treat you with consideration, but you can ensure that only people who do treat you with consideration maintain access to your presence, energy, and resources. The psychology of presence versus absence reveals perhaps the most counterintuitive aspect of social dominance. Those who are feared have mastered the art of strategic withdrawal, while those who are ignored have made themselves perpetually present. Machiavelli observed that the prince who is always available, always accessible, always granting audiences loses the mystique and gravity necessary to maintain authority. The same principle operates in all relationships, professional and personal alike. When you are always available, always responsive, always willing to drop everything to accommodate others, you communicate not generosity, but worthlessness. You signal that nothing you are doing is more important than whatever the other person wants, which inevitably leads them to conclude that what you do is indeed less important than what they want. Strategic absence creates value through scarcity, but more importantly, it creates space for others to recognize what they have lost when you are not present. The person who is always available becomes part of the furniture, noticed only in their utility, appreciated only in their function. But the person who is sometimes unavailable, who has priorities and commitments that take precedence over social availability, becomes someone whose attention must be earned rather than assumed. This is not about playing manipulative games of hard to get, but about genuinely having a life sufficiently rich and demanding that you cannot always be present for others, and about refusing to sacrifice your priorities to accommodate those who have not demonstrated reciprocal respect for your time. Machiavelli understood that respect flows toward those who respect themselves, and self-respect manifests most clearly in how you guard your time and attention. These are your only truly finite resources. Once spent, they can never be recovered. The person who treats their own time as worthless by making it infinitely available teaches others to treat it as worthless as well. The person who treats their time as valuable by protecting it carefully, by saying no to demands that do not serve them, by prioritizing their own goals and needs, teaches others that access to their time is a privilege to be earned rather than a right to be assumed. This lesson is taught not through words, but through consistent action, through the pattern of availability and unavailability that defines your relationship with others. The ignored individual typically operates under a scarcity mentality regarding relationships and attention, believing that if they are not always available, people will forget them or replace them. This fear creates a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their constant availability indeed makes them forgettable because they have removed any friction or effort from interacting with them. Meanwhile, the feared individual operates from an abundance mentality, understanding that the right people will value them more, not less, when they demonstrate self-respect through protecting their time. They recognize that relationships built on your willingness to sacrifice your priorities for others are not relationships of respect, but relationships of exploitation, and such relationships serve neither party's long-term interests. Machiavelli noted that the prince must sometimes withdraw from his subjects, must maintain a certain distance that prevents familiarity from breeding contempt. In modern contexts, this distance manifests not as physical separation, but as the maintenance of boundaries around your time, your emotional energy, and your availability for interaction. It means not responding to messages immediately every time, allowing some space before replies. It means having commitments and priorities that sometimes take precedence over social demands. It means being willing to say, "I'm not available," without elaborate justification or apology, communicating through your behavior that your time is allocated according to your own priorities, rather than according to whoever makes demands of it most insistently. The psychological mechanism here operates on a principle of loss aversion. People value what they might lose more than what they already possess with certainty. When your presence is guaranteed, it becomes devalued. When your presence must be earned and maintained through respectful behavior, it becomes prized. This is not about being manipulative or playing games, but about operating according to the fundamental psychological realities of human nature. The person who is always there becomes wallpaper. The person whose presence is contingent upon being treated well becomes someone others think carefully about disappointing. This shift in dynamic happens not through any single dramatic gesture, but through the accumulation of many small choices about when to be present and when to be absent, when to engage and when to withdraw. Machiavelli observed that power is as much about what you refuse to do as what you do, and nowhere is this more evident than in the management of your presence and attention. Every yes to a demand that does not serve you is a no to something that might serve you better. Every decision to accommodate someone who has shown no reciprocal accommodation is a decision to devalue your own priorities. Every choice to remain present in a situation where you are not valued is a choice to perpetuate your own invisibility. The feared individual understands this calculus and acts accordingly, treating their presence as the valuable resource it is, withdrawing it from situations and people that do not justify the investment, and thereby creating an environment where access to them must be earned through demonstration of respect. The weaponization of virtue represents perhaps the darkest element of Machiavellian psychology, yet it remains essential to understanding why good people often finish last in social hierarchies. Those who are perpetually ignored often possess admirable qualities: kindness, generosity, patience, forgiveness, but they have failed to understand that virtue without boundaries becomes vice. Machiavelli recognized that the ruler who attempts to be good in all circumstances will be destroyed by those who are not good, and this principle scales perfectly to individual relationships. The person who is kind to everyone without discrimination teaches others that kindness from them is worthless because it is given without judgment. The person who forgives everything teaches others that wronging them carries no lasting consequence. The person who is endlessly patient teaches others that their time has no value. This is not an argument against virtue, but rather a recognition that virtue must be strategic to be sustainable. True kindness involves being kind to those who deserve it while withdrawing kindness from those who exploit it. True forgiveness involves forgiving those who demonstrate genuine remorse and changed behavior, while refusing to forgive those who repeatedly offend without consequence. True patience involves being patient with genuine struggles, while refusing to be patient with deliberate disrespect. The person who exercises virtue indiscriminately has not achieved moral superiority, but has rather enabled and encouraged bad behavior by removing any incentive for people to do better. In this way, indiscriminate virtue becomes a form of moral cowardice, an abdication of the responsibility to maintain standards and enforce consequences. Machiavelli observed that appearing virtuous is more important than being virtuous, a statement that initially shocks but reveals profound psychological truth upon reflection. People respond not to your internal moral state, but to the image you project and the consequences you impose. The person who is genuinely kind but allows themselves to be exploited will be exploited, while the person who maintains a reputation for being fair but unforgiving of violations will be treated with care regardless of their internal emotional state. This is not about being fake or manipulative, but about recognizing that your internal virtues become socially relevant only when translated into external patterns that others can observe and respond to. Unexpressed virtue is invisible virtue, and invisible virtue serves no social function. The ignored individual often prides themselves on their moral superiority to those who are feared, believing that their willingness to absorb poor treatment somehow makes them better people. This is a comfortable delusion that serves the psychological function of allowing them to avoid the discomfort of change while maintaining self-esteem. In reality, allowing yourself to be exploited serves no higher moral purpose. It does not make the world better, does not teach exploiters to be better people, and does not model healthy relationship dynamics for others who might observe your example. Instead, it perpetuates a dynamic where exploitative people face no consequences for their behavior, effectively rewarding them for taking advantage of others while punishing yourself for your own generosity. Machiavelli understood that consequences are the only true teacher of behavior, that humans respond not to moral arguments, but to the presence or absence of incentives. When you allow someone to treat you poorly without consequence, you are training them to continue treating you poorly. When you respond to exploitation with continued generosity, you are teaching the exploiter that exploitation is an effective strategy. Your acceptance of poor treatment does not inspire the other person to suddenly recognize your worth and treat you better. It confirms their assessment that you have little worth, because worth is demonstrated through defense of boundaries rather than through acceptance of violations. This psychological reality operates regardless of whether we wish it to be otherwise. The feared individual has weaponized their virtue by making it conditional and scarce. They are kind to those who are kind to them, generous to those who reciprocate, patient with those who demonstrate good faith, and forgiving to those who show genuine remorse and changed behavior. But they are not kind to those who exploit kindness, not generous to those who take without giving, not patient with those who deliberately waste their time, and not forgiving to those who repeatedly offend without consequences. This conditional virtue serves multiple functions. It rewards good behavior, punishes bad behavior, creates clear incentives for others to treat them well, and protects their own emotional and temporal resources from being depleted by those who do not value them. Far from being immoral, this approach is the only sustainable form of virtue, because unconditional virtue inevitably exhausts itself and leaves the virtuous person bitter and depleted. Machiavelli noted that the prince who wishes to maintain his state must learn not to be good, or rather, must learn to exercise goodness strategically rather than universally. This strikes modern ears as cynical, but it is simply realistic. In a world where some people will exploit any weakness and mistake kindness for vulnerability, the person who is indiscriminately good will be indiscriminately exploited. The person who learns to be selectively good, generously rewarding respect while firmly punishing disrespect, creates an environment where goodness can flourish because it is protected by boundaries. This is not a rejection of virtue, but its mature expression, recognizing that virtue without discernment becomes enablement of vice, and that the highest form of moral behavior involves not just being good, but creating conditions where others are incentivized to be good as well. The management of emotional expression reveals another dimension where the ignored and feared diverge dramatically in their approach. Those who are perpetually overlooked often wear their hearts on their sleeves, expressing every hurt, every disappointment, every need, believing that if others simply understood their feelings, treatment would improve. Machiavelli would recognize this as a fundamental miscalculation of human psychology. Emotional transparency from a position of weakness does not inspire compassion. It invites exploitation. When people understand exactly how to hurt you, exactly what you need, exactly what you fear, and they know that expressing these vulnerabilities will not be met with consequences when they exploit them, they gain power over you that they will use consciously or unconsciously to serve their own interests. The feared individual maintains a strategic opacity about their emotional landscape, revealing vulnerability only in contexts where such revelation serves a purpose, and only to people who have demonstrated trustworthiness through consistent behavior over time. This is not about being emotionally unavailable or cold, but about recognizing that emotional intimacy is a resource to be allocated strategically rather than broadcast universally. When you immediately tell everyone about your insecurities, your fears, your needs, you're handing them the tools to manipulate you without requiring any investment or proving any worthiness on their part. Emotional vulnerability should be earned through demonstrated loyalty and respect, not given freely to anyone who asks, or even to anyone who has not asked, but whom you hope to bond with. Machiavelli observed that the successful prince must master his passions rather than being mastered by them, must never allow others to see him lose composure or control. While complete emotional suppression is neither healthy nor desirable, the principle of emotional regulation as a tool of power remains valid. When you react emotionally to every slight, every disappointment, every frustration, you train others that your emotional state is easily manipulated and that they can control your behavior by triggering your emotions. The person who remains calm in the face of provocation, who does not rise to obvious bait, who maintains composure even when discussing consequences for boundary violations, demonstrates a form of strength that others instinctively recognize and respect. The ignored individual often believes that expressing hurt will inspire others to treat them better, operating under the assumption that people are basically good and simply unaware of the impact of their actions. This naive assessment of human nature leads to repeatedly expressing pain, disappointment, or frustration, only to have these expressions ignored or dismissed because they are not accompanied by any consequences. People learn quickly that this individual's expressions of hurt are merely verbal, that no actual change in behavior or relationship will follow, and therefore these expressions become meaningless noise to be endured briefly before returning to whatever behavior caused the complaint in the first place. The emotional vulnerability has been weaponized against the vulnerable person, confirming their powerlessness rather than establishing their humanity. Machiavelli understood that appearing invulnerable is more important than being invulnerable, that the perception of strength often matters more than actual strength. When you consistently demonstrate that others' opinions and actions do not significantly impact your emotional state or your trajectory, people perceive you as stronger and more worthy of respect, regardless of your actual internal experience. This is not about being dishonest, but about recognizing that your internal emotional reality is yours to manage and that exposing it indiscriminately does not serve your interests. The person who cries easily in professional settings, who takes obvious offense at small slights, who needs constant reassurance and validation, appears weak regardless of their actual capabilities, and appearance shapes reality in social dynamics. The feared individual has learned to separate their internal emotional experience from their external emotional expression, allowing themselves to feel whatever they feel privately while presenting to the world only what serves their strategic interests. When disappointed by someone's behavior, they do not launch into a lengthy explanation of their hurt feelings. They simply reduce that person's access to them. When disrespected, they do not have an emotional breakdown. They calmly state the boundary and enforce the consequence. When someone attempts to manipulate them through guilt or emotional appeals, they do not engage with the emotional content, but rather focus on the behavioral pattern and respond accordingly. This emotional discipline creates a perception of strength and self-sufficiency that others find compelling and slightly intimidating, precisely because they cannot easily predict or manipulate this person's responses. Machiavelli recognized that power requires mystery, that the prince who is completely transparent and predictable loses the awe and careful consideration that maintains authority. In modern terms, this means maintaining some privacy around your emotional landscape, some uncertainty about exactly how you will respond to various situations, some unpredictability about your emotional reactions that keeps others from becoming too comfortable in their treatment of you. The person who is an open book becomes boring and manipulable. The person who reveals themselves selectively and strategically remains interesting and commands more careful treatment because others cannot fully predict how their actions will be received. This strategic emotional opacity is not about being cold or distant, but about protecting yourself from those who would use emotional knowledge as a weapon, while reserving genuine emotional intimacy for those who have proven worthy of it. The ultimate distinction between those who are ignored and those who are feared lies in their relationship to conflict and confrontation. The ignored have typically spent their lives avoiding conflict at all costs, believing that maintaining harmony is the highest virtue, and that confrontation damages relationships irreparably. Machiavelli would recognize this as perhaps the most self-destructive belief a person can hold, because it invites endless exploitation while preventing the very confrontations that might establish respect. Those who are feared have made peace with conflict, recognizing it not as a failure of relationship, but as a necessary mechanism for establishing and maintaining boundaries. They understand that relationships which cannot survive honest confrontation are not worth preserving, because such relationships exist only on terms of one party's continued subordination. The psychological mechanism that creates this divergence begins in childhood and is reinforced through thousands of interactions across a lifetime. The person who learns that expressing displeasure leads to punishment or abandonment develops a deep fear of conflict that manifests as endless accommodation. They would rather silently absorb poor treatment than risk the discomfort of confrontation, would rather twist themselves into increasingly uncomfortable compromises than simply state their needs clearly and enforce them consistently. This conflict avoidance does not preserve relationships. It preserves only the appearance of relationships while slowly poisoning them with accumulated resentment and unspoken boundaries. Eventually, these relationships either implode spectacularly or persist as hollow shells where one party gives endlessly while the other takes thoughtlessly. Machiavelli observed that the prince who attempts to please everyone pleases no one, that the very act of trying to avoid giving offense ensures that you will be offensive in your inconsistency and lack of clear principles. When you avoid all conflict, you become untrustworthy because others can never be certain where you actually stand or what you actually value. Your agreement means nothing because you agree with everyone. Your support means nothing because you support every side. Your presence means nothing because you never absent yourself from situations you disapprove of. In attempting to avoid the discomfort of conflict, the conflict-avoidant person creates a different kind of discomfort, the discomfort of interacting with someone who has no center, no clear identity, no firm ground they will defend. The feared individual has accepted that conflict is not the enemy of good relationships, but rather the mechanism by which good relationships are distinguished from bad ones. When you confront someone about their behavior and they respond by respecting your boundary, the relationship strengthens because you have established honest communication and mutual respect. When you confront someone about their behavior and they respond with dismissal, manipulation, or continued violation, you have learned valuable information about whether this relationship deserves your continued investment. Conflict serves as a sorting mechanism, revealing who values you enough to modify their behavior when you express clear limits, and who views you as a resource to be exploited until you stop providing value. Only through conflict can this sorting occur. Avoiding conflict simply prolongs your investment in relationships that do not serve you. Machiavelli recognized that mercy toward enemies creates more enemies, while measured punishment creates respect, a principle that applies equally to personal boundary violations. When you forgive without requiring changed behavior, you train the other person that violations are consequence-free and will likely continue. When you clearly state consequences and enforce them consistently, you train the other person that boundaries are real and violations are costly. The first approach feels generous in the moment, but leads to repeated violations and increasing resentment. The second approach feels harsh initially, but leads to either improved behavior or the natural ending of a relationship that was not serving you anyway. The person willing to engage in conflict when necessary protects themselves from exploitation, while the person who avoids conflict at all costs ensures their own victimization. The transformation from ignored to feared requires fundamentally reframing your relationship to conflict, viewing it not as something to be avoided, but as a tool to be wielded strategically when necessary. This means accepting that some relationships will end when you begin enforcing boundaries, and recognizing that these relationships should end because they were predicated on your continued subordination. It means becoming comfortable with the temporary discomfort of confrontation in exchange for the lasting comfort of being treated with respect. It means prioritizing your long-term peace over short-term harmony, understanding that true peace comes from relationships built on mutual respect rather than from the absence of open conflict. The person who masters this reframing discovers that most feared conflicts never materialize. Once you develop a reputation for being willing to confront boundary violations, most people simply stop violating your boundaries. Machiavelli's final lesson on this matter is perhaps his most important. The prince must sometimes engage in actions that appear cruel to prevent greater cruelties later. Better to have a few swift, clear confrontations early in a relationship than to allow patterns of disrespect to become entrenched, requiring either eventual explosive confrontation or perpetual suffering in silence. The person who addresses small boundary violations immediately prevents them from escalating into major violations. The person who ignores small violations hoping they will resolve themselves inevitably faces larger violations that are more difficult to address. Early conflict, when stakes are low and patterns are not yet established, serves the long-term health of relationships far better than delayed conflict, when resentment has accumulated and behavior patterns have become habitual. Those who are feared understand this and act accordingly. Those who are ignored learn it too late, if ever. What separates those who command respect from those who beg for it is not talent, virtue, or even intention. It is the willingness to claim authority over your own life through the consistent enforcement of boundaries and the strategic allocation of your presence, time, and emotional resources. Machiavelli understood that power is not given but taken, that respect is not granted but demanded through behavior rather than words, and that the person who waits for the world to recognize their worth without demonstrating it through boundaries will wait forever in invisible silence. The dark psychology that determines whether you are ignored or feared operates on principles that remain unchanged across centuries. Humans respond to incentives and consequences, value scarcity over abundance, and reserve their consideration for those who demonstrate self-respect through defending their standards. The transformation from doormat to individual worthy of respect requires accepting uncomfortable truths about human nature and your own complicity in your marginalization. Every time you accepted poor treatment without consequence, you taught others that poor treatment is acceptable. Every time you prioritized others' convenience over your own priorities, you signaled that your priorities are worthless. Every time you remained present in situations where you were not valued, you confirmed your own disposability. These patterns were not inflicted upon you by malicious others, but created through your own choices, which means they can be unmade through different choices. The power lies not in controlling others' behavior, but in controlling your responses to their behavior. and through those responses, training them toward either respecting your boundaries or losing access to you. Machiavelli's wisdom remains as relevant today as it was in Renaissance Florence. Better to be feared than loved if one cannot be both. Because fear founded on respect for real consequences provides more reliable protection than love founded on hope for reciprocated kindness. This is not a call to cruelty or aggression, but rather a recognition that boundaries without enforcement are suggestions rather than requirements, and that the person who will not defend their own worth will find no one else willing to defend it for them. The feared individual has simply accepted responsibility for creating the conditions under which they are treated well, rather than hoping others will spontaneously choose to treat them well without incentive to do so. The path forward requires courage to disrupt established patterns, wisdom to enforce boundaries consistently rather than emotionally, and acceptance that some relationships will not survive your refusal to remain subordinate. These losses are not failures, but successes, clearing space in your life for relationships built on mutual respect rather than on exploitation of your unwillingness to enforce standards. Every person who walks away when you begin demanding respect has revealed that they valued access to your resources more than relationship with your authentic self, and such people deserve to walk away. Meanwhile, those who remain and adjust their behavior have demonstrated genuine respect for you as a person rather than appreciation of you as a resource. And these relationships deepen when built on honest boundaries rather than on fearful accommodation. Machiavelli's final gift to those willing to receive it is liberation from the burden of universal niceness, permission to be strategic in your virtue and selective in your generosity, freedom to claim authority over your own boundaries without apology or excessive justification. The world will not collapse if you say no. Relationships built on your endless accommodation are not relationships worth preserving. Your time and attention are genuinely scarce resources worthy of protection. You are not obligated to absorb poor treatment, to maintain connections with people who demonstrate through their actions that they do not value you. If this message resonates with you, if you recognize yourself in the patterns of the ignored and aspire to the strategic strength of the feared, take a moment to engage with this content. Leave your thoughts in the comments, share this with someone navigating similar struggles, and subscribe to continue exploring the dark but liberating truths about power, respect, and human nature that most people prefer to deny, but that shape every relationship you will ever have.